She was born into modest beginnings, but rose to the very heart of royal power. Jeanne-Antoinette Poisson, better known to history as Madame de Pompadour, would become not only the official mistress of King Louis XV, but a powerful cultural force, political operator, and icon of the Enlightenment era. Her legacy still lingers in the gilded halls of Versailles and the refined curves of Rococo art. Jeanne-Antoinette Poisson was born on December 29, 1721, into a bourgeois Parisian family. Her father, François Poisson, worked in military provisioning under the influential Paris brothers, who were high-ranking financiers of the crown. But scandal soon struck. François Poisson was accused of black market grain dealings during a famine in France. François was forced into exile, leaving behind his young daughter and wife. In the years that followed, Jeanne-Antoinette was raised under the protection of Charles Lenormand de Tournehem, a wealthy financier, long rumored to be her biological father. Under his guardianship, she received an exceptional education, rare for a girl of her class and time. She was trained in music, art, dance, literature, and the art of conversation. By age 9, a famed fortune teller predicted that she would one day capture the heart of the king. Her mother believed it, Jeanne-Antoinette believed it, and both women did all they could to gain the attention of the king. At 20, Jeanne-Antoinette married Charles-Guillaume Lenormand de Tillol, the nephew of her guardian. Though the couple had 2 children, only one survived infancy. By the early 1740s, Madame de Tillol was making a name for herself among aristocratic circles, dazzling with her intellect, wit, and charm. Her salons attracted artists, philosophers, and nobles alike. Among her admirers was the famed French writer Voltaire. In the heart of early modern France, long before revolution shook the corners of Paris, the salon reigned as a glittering arena of wit, intellect, and social refinement. These elegant gatherings, hosted in gilded drawing rooms and candlelit parlors, were more than mere social events. They were the crucibles of culture, where the ideas that would shape an era were born. To contemporary eyes, salons were the epicenters of taste, manners, and civility, frequented by the upper middle class and the aristocracy. Within their walls, conversation flourished. Not idle chatter, but sharp, spirited debate, often led by those of a brilliant mind. Philosophy, politics, art, and science were all fair game, and nothing was too sacred to be questioned. What made these gatherings unique among the institutions of the time was the remarkable presence of women. Unlike the rigid hierarchies of court or academia, the salon offered a stage where women, known as salonières, played central and visible roles. Each salonière shaped her salon in her own image. Some were fierce conversationalists and intellectuals in their own right. Others were masterful connectors, weaving networks of thinkers and writers and amplifying the ideas of the Enlightenment. It was in her salon that Jeanne-Antoinette made her name among the elite of French society, resulting in her name reaching the ears of the king. Then, in 1745, fate intervened. On the evening of February 24, 1745, Jeanne-Antoinette Poisson received an invitation that would change the course of her life, and in many ways, the course of French history. She was formally summoned to attend a masked ball at the Grand Palace of Versailles, set for the following night. The occasion? A lavish celebration, marking the marriage of the Dauphin Louis of France to Infanta Maria Theresa of Spain. Versailles shimmered with candlelight and mystery as nobles swept through its halls in elaborate disguises. Amid the spectacle, King Louis XV, cloaked in secrecy and dressed as a tree, he met Jeanne Antoinette, who was dressed as Diana the Huntress. Within months, she became his official mistress. But there was a problem. She had no noble title. To legitimize her position at court, the king purchased the Marquisate of Pompadour, and Madame d'Étiole was transformed into Madame de Pompadour. She also obtained a legal separation from her husband, freeing her to move into the king's palace. It is now widely acknowledged that Louis XV was a far more capable and intelligent ruler than the aloof and indecisive figure history once portrayed him as. Reserved and introspective by nature, the king struggled to engage easily with those beyond his inner circle. It was this guarded temperament that made the presence of Madame de Pompadour not only welcome, but essential. Though she often issued the commands, the final decisions remained with Louis, a testament to both his authority and the subtle trust he placed in her. When Jeanne Antoinette first entered Versailles, she did so with caution and care. She began modestly, residing in a set of humble rooms tucked beneath the eaves of the palace. From there, she launched a quiet campaign of charm and diplomacy, seeking to endear herself to every figure of influence at court. Her first and most delicate mission, winning over Queen Marie Leschinska. It was no easy task. The queen, pious, dutiful, and devoutly religious, had little in common with her husband. 8 years his senior, preoccupied with the plight of her exiled father and warned from bearing 10 children in a decade, Marie had withdrawn from the king's bed and increasingly from his affections. She made it clear she had no desire to resume their physical relationship, leaving a space that others, first romantically and then politically, would fill. For 5 years, Madame de Pompadour remained discreet, her influence quietly growing in the shadows of the palace rooftops. But in time, her ascent was formalized. She moved to a grand apartment within Versailles, befitting her new status. Though Louis XV began to take other mistresses, none would rival Pompadour's power. By then, her position was unshakable. No favor was granted, no appointment made, no promotion secured without passing through her hands. More than a mistress, Madame de Pompadour had become the indispensable architect of the king's court. From 1745 to 1750, she was the king's declared mistress. But even after their romantic relationship ended, her influence endured for nearly 2 decades. She became the king's most trusted confidant, his political advisor, cultural curator, and emotional anchor. By 1752, Jeanne Antoinette Poisson, Madame de Pompadour, had risen even higher in royal favor. On October 12th of that year, she was elevated to the rank of Duchess, but her titles were more than ceremonial. In practice, she became a central figure in governance, advising Louis XV, managing court appointments, and directing favors and dismissals. To many, she served as the king's unofficial prime minister. In 1755, a critical diplomatic overture came her way. Wenzel Anton, Prince of Kaunitz-Rietberg, Austria's leading diplomat, sought her help in engineering a dramatic realignment of European alliances. The resulting Treaty of Versailles would forge an improbable bond between longtime enemies, France and Austria. This alliance, known as the Diplomatic Revolution, saw France and Austria lined up on one side against Britain and Prussia. This shift would thrust Europe into the 7 Years' War, for which France was unprepared. In 1757, the French suffered a crushing defeat at the Battle of Rossbach. It was in that same war that France lost its North American colony, Canada, to Britain. As the balance of imperial power shifted in Europe, France emerged from the war diminished and deeply in debt. The high price France had to pay for participating in the 7 Years' War was laid squarely at the feet of Madame de Pompadour. Despite the war's failures, Pompadour remained steadfast. When her political ally, Cardinal de Berny, faltered, she turned to a rising statesman, Étienne François, Duc de Choiseul. With her backing, Choiseul enacted a series of sweeping policies: the Pacte de Famille, the suppression of the Jesuits, and ultimately the Treaty of Paris in 1763, which formally ended the war, but at great cost to France's global standing. But Madame de Pompadour's legacy is most enduring in the world of culture. An accomplished artist herself, she surrounded herself with painters like François Boucher and Jean-Marc Nattier, commissioning portraits that crafted her public image from goddess to intellectual. She supported sculptors, architects, and furniture designers, becoming a driving force behind the Rococo style that defined the age. She was a protector of Enlightenment thinkers, from Voltaire to Diderot, and defended the publication of the revolutionary Encyclopédie. Under her patronage, artisans flourished, from cabinet makers like Jean-François Urbain to the founding of the now iconic Sèvres porcelain factory. Even after her sexual relationship with King Louis XV ended, Madame de Pompadour remained his greatest friend and truest confidant. Though her influence remained strong, Madame de Pompadour's health declined. In 1764, at just 42 years old, Madame de Pompadour succumbed to illness and died. Louis XV, visibly shaken, remained by her side during her final illness. Even her harshest critics noted her bravery in death. Voltaire, her longtime ally in mourning her passing, wrote, "It seems absurd that while an old scribbler like me is still alive, a beautiful woman at the height of her glory should die so young." The king allowed her a royal funeral, a rare honor for a mistress. As her coffin left Versailles under a grey, weeping sky, the king watched in silence and is reported to have said, "The marquise will not have good weather for her journey." She was laid to rest at the Couvent des Capucines in Paris. Madame de Pompadour was far more than a royal mistress. She was a stateswoman, a patron of genius, a cultural force in an age of revolution and change. Her life was a balancing act between elegance and power, intellect and survival. And in the corridors of Versailles, her legacy endures as one of the most remarkable women ever to shape the destiny of France. A decade later, Louis XV himself would follow her into history, but Madame de Pompadour's impact would long outlive them both. A noblewoman, a courtier, and one of the most powerful and enduring figures of the French court, Diane de Poitiers was born January 9th, 1500. As the mistress and trusted advisor to King Henry II of France, Diane wielded unprecedented influence at court for over 2 decades. Her role brought wealth and prestige to her family, while her refined patronage helped shape the architecture of Renaissance France. Diane was born into the French aristocracy at the Château de Saint-Vallier in the Drôme region. Her father, Jean de Poitiers, Seigneur de Saint-Vallier, and her mother, Jeanne de Batarnais, ensured that their daughter received a rigorous humanist education, rare for women of the time. She was trained in Latin, Greek, etiquette, finance, law, and architecture. Athletic and disciplined, Diane embraced physical activity, frequently riding and swimming. As a young girl, she joined the household of Princess Anne de Beaujeu, sister to King Charles VIII and former regent of France. It was here that Diane was first exposed to courtly life and to power wielded not by kings, but by women of intellect and poise. At the age of 15, Diane married Louis de Brezé, Grand Seneschal of Normandy. He was 39 years her senior. The union brought her 2 daughters and a secure place at court, where she served as lady-in-waiting to Queen Claude of France, and later to Louise of Savoy and Queen Eleanor of Austria. When her husband died in 1531, Diane de Poitiers, now the Marquise de Brezé and Seneschal of Normandy, was already a seasoned figure at court, well versed in the subtle art of power. But it was in the decades that followed, under the shifting light of the French Renaissance, that her influence would grow into legend. Diane had not merely been educated, she had been shaped by the sharpest minds of her time. Her personal library at her beloved Château d'Anay included the proto-feminist writings of Christine de Pizan, Martin Lefranc, and Guillaume Postel, works that quietly challenged the limits of women's roles in a man's world. She was also a student of philosophy and medicine, earning a reputation at court as something of an expert in both. A contemporary treatise on gynecology was even dedicated to her, a nod to the skill she frequently exercised as matron of honor and royal governess. In 1533, France watched as the young Henry, Duke of Orléans, wed the Florentine heiress Catherine de Médicis. Both were just 14. Diane, 20 years their senior and distantly related to Catherine, seemed at first an unlikely figure in the narrative, but by 1535 she had become Henry's muse, mentor, and mistress, and soon the woman who would wield unparalleled influence over the king and his court. In 1534, when Henry was just 15 and Diane was 35, their affair is believed to have begun discreetly, but it was destined to become one of the most enduring royal liaisons in French history. Despite being 20 years his senior, Diane became Henry's closest confidant and advisor. She ensured that the royal marriage produced heirs, 10 children in total, and even nursed Queen Catherine through illness. When Henry ascended the throne in 1547, the papal court recognized the reality of power in France. While a formal gift was sent to Queen Catherine, it was Diane who received a pearl necklace from Pope Paul III, a silent but resounding acknowledgement of her political significance. The following year, as Henry made his royal entry into Lyon, Diane took part in an elaborate allegorical procession, portrayed as Diana the Huntress, calmly leading a lion on a leash. In 1548, Henry conferred upon her the title Duchess of Valentinois. Despite Queen Catherine's growing jealousy, Diane's position only solidified. She controlled access to the king, managed royal correspondence, and even bore joint signatures with Henry Diane, on official documents. She arranged audiences with ambassadors, safeguarded the crown jewels, and her initials, interwoven with the king's, appeared everywhere from palace walls to public festivities. Her signature colors, black and white, became the unofficial palette of the court. Though she bore Henry an illegitimate daughter, most believed it was Diane who ensured the king fulfilled his dynastic duties with his queen, securing legitimate heirs for France. Behind the scenes, she ruled with grace and calculation, shaping not only royal domestic life, but also foreign diplomacy. Diane's power extended far beyond courtly intrigue. In a France torn between Catholic tradition and Protestant reform, she stood firmly with the Catholic cause. Her rivalry with Anne de Poitiers, the reform-minded mistress of Francis I, signaled the beginning of religious factionalism at court. Aligning herself with powerful Catholic families, the Guises and the Montmorencys, Diane helped push reformers from positions of influence. During Henry's reign, she worked to root out heresy, oversaw key military appointments, and even met with papal envoys during tense negotiations with Rome. Her patronage of the arts left a legacy as enduring as her political influence. In 1552, Henry gifted her the Château of Annay, built on land Diane had inherited from her late husband. Designed by the brilliant Philibert de Lorme, the royal architect, and adorned by the sculptor Jean Goujon, Annay was more than a residence. It was a love letter in stone, a harmonious blend of Renaissance elegance and intimate symbolism. Goujon's famed Fountain of Diana became an enduring emblem of the woman it honored. At Chenonceau, another royal gift, Diane expanded the castle by commissioning a graceful bridge across the river Cher, a feat of engineering and aesthetics. Her patronage attracted France's most brilliant artists, poets, and musicians. She was a muse to the La Pléiade poets, including Pierre de Ronsard and Joachim du Bellay, and she composed nearly 100 lyrical verses and songs, most now lost, destroyed by the king himself in a moment of privacy or regret. Even as a courtier, Diane remained deeply practical. She managed vast estates with precision and remained involved in medicine and midwifery. In 1559, her life changed abruptly when King Henry II died. His end was not on the battlefield, but in a jousting match. A splinter from a broken lance pierced his eye, reached his brain, and slowly and painfully over the course of 10 days, drew nearer to death, all the while calling for his mistress Diane. His wife Catherine de Medici kept Diane away from the king in his final days, and when he finally died, she was sidelined altogether. Catherine de Medici forced Diane to surrender Chenonceau Castle, exchanging it for the less prestigious Chaumont. Diane did not linger. She soon retired to Annay, where she spent her final years in quiet authority, managing her lands, offering care to the sick, and founding a home for unwed mothers. On April 25, 1566, Diane de Poitiers died. She was buried, by her own request, in the chapel at Annay. Her will reflected the same clarity and resolve that had defined her life, thoughtful bequests to her children, and a firm demand that they and their descendants remain faithful to the Catholic Church. Diane's beauty was legendary, but it was her intelligence, loyalty, and mastery of power that made her unforgettable. As Pierre de Bourdeille wrote upon seeing her shortly before her death, she remained the most beautiful of beautiful women.